So these are takeaways I think we all kind of agreed on, or Jeff was the first to mention this last week, so I'm just putting it in some slides with visualization so we can maybe discuss this more. And so the work that has been done at Numenta back then with HTM and like temporal memory was a learning of a sequence of features. These are ordered features, like ABCD, or like learning a melody with features. They were not at specific locations, but they're only at relative locations, like just going from one to another. And we did not really have control over the sequence transitions. So we were just like passive listeners to the melody, and it's just going through one feature to another. So the only thing the model can predict is really what is the next feature given the feature that we're at and the context or like where we're coming from, which sounds a lot like what LLMs are doing. LLMs, like there's difference in how we store the context. LLMs, you just have to feed every time, just feed it all of the context and just it will predict the next token. With temporal memory, the context is already stored in this forward projection. As we go from one token to another, the SDR itself is storing the context for us, which is very nice because we don't have to backpropagate or do any of those tricks. But that was kind of limiting in some sense because we could not actually add actions into this. We could not go from A to C, or we could not go from A to D. Usually we don't need to in these kinds of like, if it's a melody, we don't need to go from A to C or A to D. But when it's an action, if we're learning morphology and we have action, for example, we have sensor movements and we want to control where to go to next. We need to extend this theory. We need to add locations and a reference frame. So the idea is that for now learning a morphology, it's kind of the same concept, but now we have action. We can go from one feature to another. So we control the sequence transitions with actions. And the idea is that if we start at one feature, we put that in the reference frame at the bottom here. And then the action is going to take us into a different location in the reference frame. So we need to understand what this action means. Basically, we need to, that's in the reference frame itself. It's embedded knowledge in there. So it just takes us from one feature, and then we map we use the action to take us to another place, and then we put the other feature in there. And then we do the same thing over and over again until we build a model of the cup. So we'd have something like this. Now, this is something that LLMs can't do or any other model out there. We're building a structured reference frame using the actions that basically a sensory motor framework, and we're using those actions to lay out those features in the correct spatial positions. So that was extending sequence memory into morphology, and I think we agreed last time that there are parallels from this and learning behaviors. But one thing before I go into that is the idea that we need to understand what these actions mean, and this to me was something I've been thinking about this morning, which is it's an idea that I haven't thought through. But what if the actions, what if the input to layer 6 was mostly about actions rather than a movement itself? So it's like, what if we associate the actions and with the movement in the reference frame at this input? So like it's like presynaptic representation would be the actions, and then postsynaptic would be the movement, and that's what we're associating. I'll talk about that later and maybe at the end of the presentation. But that's just some insight that I had while I was putting this together. So any questions so far about this part? I think we all agree on this.
Yeah, I just comment on the, I was there too for a while, thinking like, oh, maybe maybe there's a different interpretation of layer 6. Like we're taking actions moving through layer 6. I'm going to present. I don't want to step on what you're going to present, but I moved away from that yesterday or 2 days ago.
Okay.
So I'm going to propose, that was a lot of problems with that idea. It kept tripping me. I couldn't make it work. It didn't make sense. So I have an alternate proposal, but that's not to take away what you're presenting. So,
Yeah.
but
Well, what kind of evidence that I had for this, or like it's not really evidence, but what kind of insight in support of this would be the layer 5 motor output in V1 that goes back into layer 6 in the region 2. And I thought, this is an reference copy of the motor output that we had from the lower region, and it's being mapped into a change in the location of the reference frame in the higher region.
right, but it still could just be movement in space, right? It doesn't have to be something else.
Yeah.
Right.
But anyway, this is not the main focus, but just the parallels basically between the morphology and the behaviors. So similarly, when we're learning a behavior, we're looking at a sequence of behavior states, and the definition of a state itself is it has its own reference frame, a spatial reference frame, and it's basically pooling spatially those changes at locations in the reference frame. So it's like each one of those is a morphology, and we're doing like second order pooling of some sort, but we still have to have a reference frame to store those changes at these different locations. But if you look at the higher order transitions between those states, it looks a lot similar to what we had before. We can have a behavior that's unfolding in front of us. We don't really have control over how to go from one state to another. These are just the transitions are just played out in front of us, and we cannot really control that transition. But there are other examples of behaviors where we can actually control the transitions. Let's say we're opening and closing the stapler. And the stapler is just, it could be closed and we're just opening. So we can just basically go through the states in a shuffled manner or an unordered manner, which is similar to going through learning a morphology by disregarding the actual order of the states, or like the sequence, the features in the sequence. So similarly here, we control the sequence transitions with the actions. So one action could take us from here to there, and then another action could take us from here to there. And this may not be the same behavior that we learned or observed by just looking at it being open and closed, either by someone else or just played in animation. So we actually can control that. We can control the transitions. So similarly, I was thinking that we can map those actions in some reference frame with, like, I know we haven't agreed on this yet, but I'm just saying that actions are being mapped to locations in reference frame similarly to how this happened in morphology. But it would be a 1D reference frame, but just because we can control those transitions, we can learn to map the actions into state transitions like this. So a movement in the reference frame. And then again, I was thinking here, we would associate actions with the movements. So I want to learn how to go from here to there. I need to really understand what this action mean, or associate it with some with a change in the reference frame location. I think this is a big open question. How do we do that? How do we associate some action?
I'm going to propose a solution to that today.
Okay, cool. Yeah, nice. I've been thinking
That's
about
basically the main thing I'm going to try and propose today.
Nice.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's good to clarify, like, this is the question we're trying to solve. This is kind of the problem space. We have kind of talked about a lot about modeling behaviors that are just a sequence before and have a pretty good solution, but now how do we do behaviors that involve actions? And yeah, I think those slides visualize it very nicely.
Nice. Okay. It's just one insight is that it seems similar to morphology, and I was just suggesting that maybe we still have the same problem with morphology, basically learning how actions translate into movements in the reference frame. This is something that we're also like, if we can solve it for behaviors, if we can solve it for morphology, we'll be able to solve it for behaviors. It's
Well,
the same.
I don't know. I view it as I didn't view that as an unsolved problem for the morphology models. I thought we have a pretty good idea how that's happening. I mean, it's literally, you can start off by thinking if it's just a single sensor patch, you can think of it just movement of the sensor patch through space, and
Yeah.
that movement vector updates the grid cells, and so I agree. There's a seeming parallel here, but I'm not sure if you think that is an unsolved problem on the left bottom corner.
Well, we kind of, I think we still have to translate between like an eye muscle movement, which is going to be an action. So the action is not really in the reference frame, but rather I'm thinking of it as, you know, a muscle movement for the eye to turn it right a little bit.
Right.
How that
Right.
will translate into a different location in the reference frame.
But like just like a week ago, we talked about how, you know, we know that the cortex doesn't control muscles, right? So, and we talked about this very colliculus and how if you specify if the movement in relative to the object is translated to a movement relative to the body, then optics like things like this pericollicus can handle all the complicated machinery to actually get the sensor to the right position. So that's one direction. Anyway, I'm not sure. There might be a problem here, but I'm not aware of the major difficulty on the bottom left corner.
Okay.
So, but you know, the challenge is, it seems like the bottom right corner is similar, but I'm going to argue at the moment it's not. It's different.
Okay.
Well, I didn't understand that until 2 days ago, so it's a new idea.
Yeah, well, this was everything I wanted to present. I think we can start discussions from here.
Right.
This may be a nice segue into what Jeff is proposing.
Right. I think it's a good intro.
Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, I just you know, just a few more words on it. You know, as we said last week, at the end of our focus week, it wasn't another week or 3 days. What do we call it? Focus session. Mini session. It's more than a mini session. It just struck me how at least myself, I've been thinking about this incompletely. You know, we've been talking all these discussions about behaviors, as you said, and we've always the model we came up for modeling behaviors is always a high order sequence model. Even the stapler, we viewed it as a high order sequence of behavioral, you know, of movements or changes in the object. But in reality, as you point out there, it's not a high order sequence. You can move it up and down, like I described in an old document I wrote a few days ago. And so that the idea that, hey, we never really dealt with the equivalent of a sensory motor. I don't want to call it sensory motor. We haven't dealt with the equivalent of the fact that most behaviors are tied, are not self-generated. They're not high order sequences. Even when we talked about like a light switch turning on a light bulb, that's you know, if the light bulb went on and off periodically every 3 seconds, then we could say, yeah, that's a high order sequence, like a traffic light. But if the light goes on when I flip a switch, well, that's not a high order sequence. Yet it's also a movement that's not in. It's not a movement in the behavioral model. It's not a movement in the object. Even if I'm looking at the lamp, the thing to turn the lamp on is occurring somewhere else in the world. And so it was like, this was sort of the epiphany that it felt like last week. It was like, oh, we haven't really understood that there's this division between high order behavioral sequences and non-high order behavioral sequences. And if we think about that, then some of the stuff will come figure it out. Anyway, I'm just repeating some of the things you just said in different language. So, so why don't I share my screen? I'm going to use CalDraw here. So the first thing I did is we talked about, I'm showing here 2 columns or 2 learning modules, but in the language of biology, so columns. And I'm showing one learning morphological models, which we spend an awful lot of time on, so that should not be new. And then one showing behavioral models. If you've been following this, you know that originally we thought these might be combined, and then Viviane said they maybe should be separate, and I never really felt comfortable with that. And one of the reasons I didn't feel comfortable with separating the morphology models and behavioral models, I just didn't know how they'd interact. That was just one of the reasons. I just didn't know how these two would, before they were co-located, you can understand it a little bit better, but I I couldn't work it through of how these two would relate to each other. Because obviously I learned behavioral models as part of some morphology, some morphology someplace. Anyway, so the first exercise I did was just to start off on the left here, writing down the kind of things we know about morphology models. And if behavior models are identical, we should be able to map the same onto the same columns, the same functions. We should be able to map them to behavioral stuff. So just to remind ourselves, sticking to the left side here, let me bring up my little, this is our standard object here. We have features coming in, which would be represented in many columns. We'll just call them morphological features. We associate them with the location. I'm not showing the input to the change in the location. So these end up being SDRs that represent a particular morphological feature on a particular object at a particular location. Recently, we've always talked about pooling them. These morphological features. These are the different points on the object that you could pool them and create an object ID. And then recently, as we've been thinking about it, we said, hey, you know what? When we have objects that change, like the stapler, well, the stapler can stop in different positions, and so and we can do flash inference on a stapler that's open or closed or in between. So that required us to actually, if the movement of the object stops moving, then all of a sudden we can start learning the morphological features again, and then we have a state ID. So this would be like the keyframes. This would be like, oh, what is the stapler? The stapler is open, the stapler is closed. It's still a morphological model. So you get an overall stapler, you have different positions of the stapler might be. And we could vote on both of these, right? It's clear now that it's the object state ID, which is the one that gets passed into it, the higher order column as a child object. So like if I put a picture of the open stapler on the coffee cup, I would learn it as the open stapler, not as the closed stapler. I'd say that's the thing I'd have to be able to associate this keyframe or this object state as the child to a parent. So this, in some sense, is the major output of the column, is this object state. That would be, in the stapler example, again, open, closed, or anywhere we see it in between. Other object could be, the traffic light's on or off, or switches up or down, or something like that. So the only reason we actually, just to review, the only reason we actually really need the overall object ID, which would be like stapler, is that we can say the word, we can think about as a stapler. And so there seems to be a representation in the brain somewhere that, it's a stapler, which you could just, by pooling over the object state IDs or pooling over all, over these things, you get an ID. But it's clear that the object state is actually more important, at least for hierarchy in compositional modeling. So that's where we were. I put a little note down here in the bottom, and I said a morphological column is self-contained, that it can learn sensory motor models in high order sequences. Oh, I didn't mention the high order sequences. If it turns out that we observe the object over and over again in the same order, like I move my finger in a particular order over an object, well, then the features would come in the same order as Ramy just showed, and it would be high order sequence. And the neural mechanism we came up with for temporal memory, it learns high order sequences and it learns sensory motor sequences. So the same basic temporal memory algorithm, we've shown this over and over again, can learn sensory motor models, and it can learn high order sequences by just associating SDRs one after another in this thing. So down again to the bottom here, I say a morphological column is a self-contained. It can learn sensory motor models and high order sequences. And sometimes we can think of this all by itself. You don't really need anything else. If you give enough time to learn, this thing could learn morphology models.
And we can also learn higher order sequences of the object state IDs, right? In case of the behaviors that just kind of unfold.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Yes, we could.
Isn't that the kind of the idea of the behavior models we talked about so far, that we would basically just learn a temporal sequence of states?
Right, but well, it wasn't temporal. The behavior models we've run so far is not a temporal sequence of states. It's a temporal sequence of changing features, right? I mean, the huge difference between this model on the left and this model on the right is that these features are static features. Think of them as the parvocellular cells from the retina. They're static. It's only when things stop moving that you get this. So nothing's moving at this point. And then what we talked about for the behavioral models is just the opposite. It's like the feature is when the input, the thing that is input to layer 4 is only when the feature is changing. You have a morphological feature that's changing. This would be like the magnocellular cells. And so this might be an edge. This would only be an edge moving. And if the edge wasn't moving, you wouldn't get a feature here. But here, if the edge is moving, you don't get a feature. But if the edge is static, you get a feature. Here, if the edge is static, you don't get a feature. But if the edge is moving, then you do get a feature. That was
but there we would also learn a sequence of behavior state IDs.
Well, right. So I was picking apart maybe one of the words you used there. I didn't show that here, but I suppose we never talked about this, but I don't. Maybe we did. I don't remember. I suppose there's no reason. We could just say, well, sequences can be learned here too, right?
Yeah, because like in the case of a structured model, it would, like, going through a sequence of states, it would be much more efficient to learn a sequence of state IDs instead of a sequence of all the possible features at all the possible locations that you could be anywhere and moving your sensor arbitrarily over that behavior while the behavior is happening. So it would be easier to just say, okay, now you're in behavior state X, so expect these features if you go to that location.
You lost me there. I want to make sure this doesn't. If it, I'm trying to understand if what you just said is going to cause problems with what I'm going to say in a moment. So, do you want to say that again? I mean, let's just start just back over a second. This is an SDR, object state ID, and I suppose if an object, let's say an object was the traffic light, and so it just went through a series of instantaneous changes, something like that. Then you would have like the red state, the green state, and the yellow state here. And you're saying you could learn the sequence at this level right here.
Yeah.
Was there anything else you're saying about that?
No, that's the main point. It might not be relevant for what you're about to talk.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah. It's a confusing thing for what I'm going to talk about right now. So I'll just say that if the temporal memory algorithm, if this works, well, here's if in theory you could learn sequences up here. There's an SDR and you have transitions of SDRs, you could just learn that sequence. I wasn't thinking of that. So that's a new thing for me.
I was just thinking for behavior, it would be better to learn there because you're still having the location representation and you can still move arbitrarily through that location space. So it'd be very hard to, at the same time, represent a sequence in layer 4 while also like predicting different features for different locations.
Well, I guess layer 4 would be the following. Imagine I'm touching a coffee mug or pen, and I've developed a habit of touching it in the same sequence over and over again. I fidget with the pen and I move my finger over and over and over again. If I did that, then layer 4 would basically, maybe, it's a little confusing. The way we've defined it, that as the finger is moving, this model wouldn't get any data because as the finger is moving, we're now in the behavioral model, right? It's a little confusing. I think it becomes more, the whole idea of sequences over here is a little bit confusing. It makes a lot more sense in the behavioral models.
I was saying it for both, like also for the behavior model, that behavior would be learned as a sequence of states instead of a sequence of incoming features, because because you're not seeing the same.
Let's go over there because I think even what a state is weird. Okay, everything on the left here is going to be basically built on static morphological features. That is, think again about the parvocellular cells. These cells only respond when there's nothing changing on the sensor patch. And everything over here is the opposite. Everything over here is based on things that are changing. the sensor, the morphological feature is changing, that it's not static anymore. And everything is based on that. So when we talk about behavior states and object states, I think we have to keep that in mind, the whole thing. Let me just try to walk through this a bit, and let's see if it becomes clearer. So what we did prior in our behavioral models, we just said, okay, let's just substitute here. Instead of these static features, we're going to put in these dynamic or changing features. And so if the object isn't moving, there's nothing going on in this model, nothing. Only when the object starts moving do we start modeling something here. And when the object stops moving again, then this model stops. There's nothing going on here anymore. It's only active during active changes. So we did that, and we said, okay, well, if we just use the same mechanism we had in the morphology model, the main difference would be time, because there's a sequence of time going on here. But other than that, we could basically pool whatever features are moving. Like this would be all the edges that are moving on the stapler, all those edges that are moving at certain locations. Then we could pool that, and we would get a behavioral ID. And we could say, oh, that's the stapler opening, something like that. Or this is someone walking, that kind of thing. I asked myself, is there an equivalent to, so that's what we had before. We had these two items. And we also used the location. The location still, where is the sensor on the object? So that's not going to help us for anything else. It just says we're looking at the stapler at some point, that point's moving, other columns are looking at different points, and those parts are moving. If you then take all that and you pull them and you do a pooling together, you'll get like, an object of a hinge, for example. So instead of being stapler, I wrote it down as like, oh, we talked about that's a hinge behavior. And then I asked myself, well, what would be the equivalent of a behavioral state? Like over here, we had the object state, which is like the stapler's, open or closed. Those are two morphologies. Is there an equivalent to a behavioral state on a behavior? It is not obvious. And so I'm not sure I know the answer to that question, but I said to myself, well, if you think about the behavioral state is a subset of the overall behavior, right? So, this is the stapler, different positions the stapler can be. This is the overall behavior of a hinge, and maybe the state of different states that could be occurring is that the hinge is moving up or the hinge is moving down. Those are the two states you could have. Both of those are part of hinge, right? And and at any point in place, the hinge may be moving up or moving down. So if I were to ask myself, what's the equivalent of the object state, which is like open and closed, but now I'm talking about changes, this is the best I could come up with.
But I thought we already had behavioral states and a sequence of states that define the behavior ID. Like depending on where you are in the stapler or hinge opening behavior, you'd expect different changes at different locations. At first you'd expect the changes along this axis.
Right. But remember, with the stapler, I could say the stapler is at 45 degrees, but that doesn't tell me how it's going to move. It could go up or down from there, right?
Yeah, but we still have a representation of states. Like within the hinge behavior, there are different states of the hinge moving. And then, yeah, it's still
what are
a
those?
question of how
What are those different states?
Where we would expect the changes to happen. Like at any point in time, where would we expect changes to happen?
Right. Is that seems like it's the same thing I'm saying here, right? Like if I have observed a hinge, let's say this hinge goes between 0 and 90 degrees. Well, at 0 degrees, it can only go up, and 90 degrees, it can only go down. And in between, it could go up or down. I don't know. It depends on how it's moved, right? So, if you want to call it, that's pretty much what I'm calling a behavioral state. It's like
Yeah, so I guess how I thought of the behavioral states were, like, I'm just copying a picture next to yours. I can move it in a moment again. Like each of these slices would be a behavioral state. And then all of those pooled together would be the behavior ID. And then so far we only talked about transitioning through those in time. So a certain amount of time passing means now we expect movement to happen here instead of further down. But now we want to be able to actively move the stapler. So now we would have to figure out different kind of transitions between these behavioral states.
Right. I'm not sure how that's disagreeing with what I'm saying. I'm confused.
So are you saying, Jeff, that we only have two behavior states for the whole movement of the behavior hinge of the stapler? Is it up or down?
Maybe. Here's what I'm saying. I started with our model here on the left, and I say, what if behavior models are identical? They have the exact same, and I'm not sure this is true. So I'm just saying, what if they were identical physically, right? Like they use the same neural machinery, then I should be able to take everything I know on the left side here and find the equivalent in a behavior model on the right. Because let's assume, maybe incorrectly, but assume that we have the same basic cortical column. What would that imply? And that's what this exercise is. I started out up until recently, I hadn't really been thinking about the equivalent of this layer here, this object state ID. We didn't even understand this from morphology models until pretty recently. Like, oh yeah, we need to do like keyframes, learn what the object looks like if it stops in between. Over here, nothing here is representing what the object looks like. There's nothing here about looking morphology. It's just like points that are moving. And so I'm just saying what would be equivalent to this guy. In the hinge case, if I just have a hinge and the hinge is rotating on a pivot point, and let's say the hinge goes between 0 and 90 degrees, well, the only thing I could think that's equivalent to behavioral states is that at any point in between 0 and 90 degrees, there are two possible directions this hinge could be moving. It could be moving up or moving down. At the 90-degree opening, it could only move down. The 0-degree opening could only move up. This is not a main part of what I'm presenting here today. This is just, I was just trying to put words on what would be the equivalent to this over here. Now, Viviane, you've been thinking about it more than I have in this diagram here. But if you think about this, if you call this one of these planes a behavioral state, well, then that state, you don't know which way it's going to go, right? It could go up. So I would say the equivalent in this diagram is that I'm at this position, and at this point, there are, this could go one way, or it could go the other way. So if I'm looking at some point in the behavioral model, there are two possible ways it could go. It could be going this way, this, and I guess I was calling those states.
I agree with that. I just thought that was like what we already had in the current behavior theory, but only that so far we basically just had one set of transitions that were possible.
Right.
Those were through time in one direction.
So maybe the difference here is I started out from a different way of looking at it. I started out looking at it, how would I map these onto these layers? What is it? And I never thought about that. This to me was always, when we talked about this, it was always sort of this conceptual idea. And I'm just saying, hey, it actually can be represented by these neurons right here. And if I was, that's all I'm saying. It's not saying this isn't right. I just looked at it from a different point of view. I said, let me find the mapping here. Where do these things fit in the model? So yes, the way you've described these, as long as you're agreeing that if the stapler had its self-motivation, if the stapler just did its own thing and I didn't have to touch it, it just went up and down, then I would move through these states in a high order sequence, right?
Yeah. So basically before we just had these arrows up here, and then now we're talking about how can we also have those down here and use different actions to move
but it
them.
also it means at any point I could stop moving up and I could move down again. I could just go up a little bit and then down again.
Go back.
So it's not like I just want to jump to the end state. There isn't in the general case there is no end state necessarily. I could just be opening it halfway and then I would just be closing out a third. I mean, so we kept talking about like, oh, there's some goal. Maybe we can still get there. There's a goal we want to get there, but the model itself isn't always like in this order.
Right. Yeah. So
Right.
if you're in the middle slice, you have two possible actions available to you going
Right.
backwards or
Right.
forwards. And those are different actions. Yeah, I
Right.
guess I just wanted to, I was just confused because you said we only had the behavior ID before, and that would in itself wouldn't be sufficient to predict which features to see at what location we would.
Well, it would be if you learn the sequence, if you learn the sequence here, right?
Yes, yeah, so you still need to know, like, you still need to represent where you are in the sequence or have, infer where
Right.
you are in the sequence.
So this is the first time today that we've ever discussed maybe having sequence IDs, sequences in the behavioral state representation. I mean, I never considered that before. So up to now, to me, sequences are always in this layer 4, and that works. It works. But you know, I hadn't thought about, oh, maybe we're learning sequences of state IDs here, which is possible too. So that's a new item for me. It's not the main point of what I want to talk about today. So best, hopefully we're in agreement. What we're saying is, hey, I'm just trying to map this onto layers of, you know, if we have a model in layers of cortex here, we should have something very equivalent here. What are they? And just state it like that. It would also imply that, of course, many columns are voting on both. This would be like, you know, oh, this is a hinge, but this would be more like, oh, the hinge is moving up and the hinge is moving down. That's what the voting would be doing there. So now the main thing I want to get to here, which is this text down at the bottom here, which is essentially saying a behavior column can learn behaviors that are high order sequences. But as Ramy started out, and we talked about last week, but often behaviors are caused by other behaviors and events occurring elsewhere. That is, this is not a self-contained column. If I'm modeling the stapler and someone wants to open the stapler, that's not here. I can't represent that. You know, it's tempting to think like, oh, at one point I say, oh, my finger's touching the stapler, so I just move my finger. But that's not true. If we think about like the light again, or most things in the world, I might be modeling a lamp here, and the thing that's changing making the lamp change or something change is elsewhere. It's not in this column, right? It could be anything really. You know, I turn the flame up on my stove. I rotate a knob. It's, you know, that knob is not the flame. So there's a general thing that these models can be driven by external events that are not contained within this model. And there's not really an equivalent over here, you know, is I don't need to know anything else besides the object I'm modeling and where my sensor is to learn a model of and make predictions about morphological models. But here, behavioral models are driven largely by external events. So that is the big difference. And the question then is, the first thing I had to do is say, pay no attention to this movement location here. It has nothing to do with changing the behavioral states. This is just part of this model, and don't think about it like, oh, this is my finger. How does my finger move the stapler up? That's the wrong way to think about it, because I can move the stapler up with my other hand, or with a stick, or with, you know, something else, right? So there's got to be an external signal that's telling this guy what behavior should be exhibited. And so every time we've talked about like all these things, like, you know, turning the light switch, or what are the other ones we talk? Anyway, there's a ton of them, right? You do something and it causes an action elsewhere. So that was the first. So the first big insight is like, this is insufficient on its own, and the things that could control this behavior could be anywhere, right? It could be anything. If I want to turn a light on, I could move a switch on the light, or I can move a switch, it's on the other side of the room. I could clap my hands. I could say, hey, Alexa, turn the light on. You know, I mean, there's almost unlimited ways of things that behaviors might be created that this object can change. And so I have to have some sort of way of broadcasting behaviors from elsewhere. I have to be able to associate the behavior of the switch with the behavior of the lamp. Or anything really. There's no and I started working through examples. It's really complicated, because sometimes like a behavior, if I'm rotating a dial, I could have a dial that I rotate the dial imagine as I rotate the dial, the stapler goes up and down as I rotate the dial. So there's a continuous movement of the dial that corresponds to the continuous movement of the stapler. Or I could push a button and the stapler moves up, and I push a button, the stapler moves down. Or I could have an up, down, and a button and a down button. I mean, and so there's all these combinations between sequences of behaviors that tie into other sequences of behaviors. So we need a general mechanism to coordinate behaviors in one part of the world with behaviors in another part of the world. So this is the proposal I have. I want to, in this case, just focus first on the right-hand side. This is, again, is our behavioral model, right? And I'm showing the left side here to say, well, if this is happening on the right, what would be the equivalent on the left? But let's start with the right. This is the behavioral model we have here. And so the first thing I can say is, well, we need some sort of broadcast information, because this guy could learn to change his state based on almost anything else. And I'm gonna propose that there is some broadcast information, and it's going to be learned as a causal association. That is some other behavior occurred in the world. It's going to be broadcast, and then if my behavior changes, this column changes, I'm going to learn the causal association. It's going to be time order dependent. That is something else had to happen first. Then if I change, I can learn that might have caused me to happen. So there's two things. This goes back to the other stuff I was talking about last week, and I wrote this quickly last night. So hopefully it's the language may be messed up. I might have to walk through it carefully. So what is broadcast? I'm going to propose one of the things that's broadcast is an attended area in egocentric space. Now I propose this is required earlier. Remember I talked about this is, you know, how I talked about attention. Attention is just like this area in egocentric space, and we can use that to learn morphology models. We can learn that to learn compositional structures. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about it, but I've kind of developed this in my head pretty deeply. So I'm just going to state it there. That I needed this idea to even learn morphology models, that you attend to an area in space, and then when you attend to that area in space, then the columns in the cortex infer what's in that area. Do you remember? It was like, you know, like I was at the intersection, and I'm looking around the intersection, and it could be a static intersection, but I would attend to different objects in the intersection, and as I attend to those objects, those would be typically things that aren't always there, like a car or a bicycle, that the rest of the cortex says what's in that area, and it can be multimodal. It says, okay, there's a bicycle in that area, or there's a car in that area. Well, the same thing can be happening here with behavioral objects. I could be attending to an area in space, and I could recognize a morphology object, or I could be the cortex could be recognizing a behavioral object in that space. It doesn't really matter. Once you get to this broadcast, we could say they're almost identical. You could say there's some people are saying, oh, what's in this space? Oh, it could be morphology, it could be a behavior. We don't have to make a distinction. There's just some object that's been recognized there. And so I said here in this next sentence, the inferred object can be morphological or behavioral. And what's broadcast is, you know, I go, okay, tend to this location in space. This guy might say, oh, there's an open stapler there. And this guy might say, oh, I'm observing a hinge opening in that space. You get one of those two. I don't think you get both. There's a lot packed into that already here. So did anyone not understand what I just said there, or did I say something confusing? You got to really get this idea that we've decided we're going to tend to some area in space, and then the cortex as a whole says, whoever's observing that space or wants to observe that space or can move the observer space, come and tell us what you're observing there. And you're going to get these either behavioral state ID or an object state ID.
I'm just wondering, why can't we have both? Are they voting together? Or audio cut out, I think.
In vision, you've got these parvocellular and magnocellular cells. They're sort of either or. You can't have both. It's either, you know, if the magnocellular cells are firing, then the parvocellular cells aren't firing, and the parvocellular cells are firing, then the magnocellular cells aren't firing. It may not be that black and white, but that's how it's often described, and it's how I've been viewing it. So I haven't thought about yet. I haven't gone any deeper yet to say, oh, what would happen if I had both of them going? It's possible. I don't know, but I'm just going for the moment. The key idea here is not that. The key idea here is that you have this attended space. Within that attended space, you imagine you're like the hippocampus or something, and you say, okay, let's attend to this space, and everybody who can attends to that space, and the cortex as a whole tries to return back the largest model it can find. It says, oh, I see a staple here, or I see a hinge opening here. Whether you can do both, I don't know. I've been thinking about it as not both at the same time.
Okay.
So broadcast signal, sorry, I'm trying to understand, is what's coming into the column?
Let me tell you what broadcast signal is. Layer 2 and layer 3, they project broadly, right?
Right.
We think of them as voting if you're in the same region. We think of them as layer 3 going to layer 4 in the next region as a feature. But the voting is really what I'm talking about. These cells can spread broadly, and just for the moment, assume they go everywhere.
Okay.
They won't. In practicality, they won't, because not everything is associatively possible. But let's assume that in parts of the cortex, all these cells are voting, and they're trying to reach a consensus, and whatever they reach, those axons spread broadly. They're available to everybody. So anyone could learn. It's just some SDR out there. But if you're looking at it, you could learn it. You could say, oh, look, there's this SDR. I'm going to associate this with my thing. So this thing that I'm saying is broadcast. These are being broadcast. But they're also coming in on the apical dendrites. So this is basically, this guy could say, look, I'm observing this. But someone else is saying, I say I'm observing some behavior. The stapler is opening. But a moment ago, someone said, I just flipped the switch up. There was I'm attending, so I attended some area, the switch went up. Now I attend to the stapler, and the stapler goes up. You go back and forth. So there's this sort of like, you're alternating, I think I said here, by attending to a series of areas, like there's an action occurring at location A, and then there's another action occurring at point B, and another action occurring at point A or C, and another action occurring at point D. By going through a sequence of these, that assuming that there's a time, dependent sort of plasticity up here, then this guy says, I'm observing a behavior. What was the most recent behavior that occurred? And I'll associate my behavior with that most recent behavior. But this requires attending to things. Again, the child learning that a light switch turns the light on, they have to attend to the light switch, then they attend to the light, then they attend to the light switch, then they attend to the light, and they attend to the light switch, they attend to the light. It's not like I just flip the switch on and I'm not even thinking about it. It's like when you're learning this stuff, you have to attend to these things. So it's literally, you can think of the brain just sitting out there. It's attending to novelty all the time. It's attending to the novelty. It could be an unexpected object, or it could be, unexpected action or behavior. And because it's not incorporated in someone's model yet. So again, if I'm at the intersection, there's a whole bunch of things in the intersection are static that are always there. Like there's certain signs and the lines on the road, and maybe there's some even actions that are always there, like the traffic lights are changing. But let's assume it's just morphological features at the moment. Now a new morphological feature comes along, I attend to it, or maybe there's a behavior someplace, something is changing someplace, and I go look at that. So the point is, you're just constantly going between these novel things in the world, and you're trying, and then you're doing it in an order, but it's not necessarily a high order sequence necessarily, but it could be just like, oh, the switch was up and now the light turns on. But you do have to attend to these different. You have to attend, and it learns causal. It's trying to learn causal relationships to the things you attended.
Okay. I see where you're going. I also like what broadcast signals are.
Yeah, broadcasting is not. It's just the same axons that are voting. It's not. There's really no difference.
Are these coming from the thalamus, like matrix cells, or are they coming from neighboring columns?
It does come in, it doesn't have to, columns anywhere, right? The columns anywhere. Like I could tend to a light switch, and I can imagine this. I can even attend to the light switch. I'm not even in the dark, and so I'm attending to it with my fingers, and so I'm attending. So there's some place, and I throw this switch. I'm getting off your question, Ramy. I'm sorry. You asked me.
I'm just wondering if is this like anatomically, is this like a layer 6 to layer 1?
No, these are layers. These are layer 2 to layer 2, and let's say this layer 2 and layer 3. Just start there.
Okay.
Those are the things we're broadcasting, which we already do. We're already sending it to other columns. If they go to the imagine layer 3 projects to layer 3. If the axons that project from layer 3 cells project to the basal dendrites of layer 3 cells in another column, that's voting. That's like we're trying to come to an agreement here. But if the layer 3 cells project to apical dendrites of another column, that's the causal association. I didn't draw that here. I should have drawn that. That's a distinction. It's like you can imagine these cells here. These can go 3 places. They can go straight over to here to another column, not a behavioral column, but to another morphology column, let's say, and they're voting. They can go, the same axons can go and project to layer 4 in another region, and that's a compositional structure. But these same axons can go up to layer 1 and go over to, and anyone can look at them. So anyone who's looking at all the columns in the cortex, in theory, could be saying, "Oh, there's this open stapler," or they could all be saying, "There's a hinge that's opening." That's available to everybody. So the same axon could go to layer 4, could go to layer 3, and go to layer 1.
I just didn't know about the anatomical projection from layer 3 to layer 1.
Right. I don't know about it either. I'm making it up. Right. I do know that these things go all over the place. Right. They do go all over the place, and you see, they're not neat. We do know specifically that there is this, layer 3 to layer 3 sometimes, and there's also layer 3 to layer 4 in the hierarchy. I'm proposing here, and perhaps this is a prediction of the theory, is that these, especially here, these behavioral states are going up to layer 1. In some sense, you have to solve this problem. We have to solve the problem. How do I associate one behavior with another behavior? And there is no a priori knowledge about where these behaviors will be, what they are. Right? It's like this occurred. I need to learn that. This is a way of doing it. Right? This is a way of doing a sort of causal association between these things.
Yeah, remember the kind of anatomical evidence I showed last week? There was this was talking about feedback connections, but they did go from layer 3 to layer 1 and layer 6 to layer 6 and 1. So there's definitely some kind of connectivity.
Right. So look, there's a huge number of details I'm skipping over here, which I don't know the answer to. But the big idea that I felt was a big idea was just, first of all, understanding that we can't resolve the behavioral paradigm, like how do I learn light switches turn on lights within a column. We have to involve actions in 2 different parts of the world. I have to observe some sort of behavior in one part of the world and associate with behavior in another part of the world. I have to do that by attending to them in sequence. And then I have to be able to broadcast the recognized behavior in one part of the world with the recognized behavior in another part of the world. And therefore there has to be this sort of time order dependent causal association. And I need a way that differentiate that from like voting. So I do remember once that there was at least one paper which was talking about apical dendrites and they were talking about reinforcement learning or something like that, but they showed anatomical evidence that there is this time order dependent, like with you have to, how does it work? That, when a cell fires, it sends an apical dendritic spike up the apical dendrites, and there was this time order, like for that to learn, they already had the synapses up here already had to be active. It's like the pattern had to be active before this guy could learn that pattern. This guy firing learns that pattern. So there was this causal association time order going on in apical dendrites. Apical dendrites are very complicated. Layer 1's complicated. It's not a uniform thing. There's lots of structure up there that we could talk about. But so I'm not saying all apical dendrites do this, but it would make sense in this case, at least in this case of behavioral state ID. And maybe even object ID. One key item that I referred to here. No, right down here, this one. I said, by tend to a series of areas, causal association can be learned between any combination. So of object ID, object state ID, behavior ID, and behavioral state ID. Imagine these 4 green lines here are all being broadcast, right? Simultaneously. And so when a column comes along and it wants to try to learn a causal association, it could pick from any one of these that are active, any one that makes sense. So it's kind of interesting. It'd be sort of saying like, oh, if I see an object, I might predict the behavior somewhere else. Or I say, oh, I only see the when the stapler is in the open position, I predict the behavior somewhere else. Like if I see an open stapler, then I expect the door to be open. When I see a closed stapler, I expect the door closed. So I could be associating object states together. And then I could say, oh, when the stapler is being raised, then I can associate with an object or an object state or with a. So there's these 4 things, and you can mix and match them. If the associative memory wouldn't care, you can come through all kinds of screwball examples of things we can do where you have either objects or behaviors associated with either objects or behaviors. And so the system says it doesn't really matter. Anything that repeats over and over again can be learned. That was one of the most exciting things about it. It's a very, very broad idea. It goes back to the fact that even though we think of these 2 columns as different morphological features and behavioral, morphological models, behavioral models, once they're broadcasting information, they look identical. No one knows that the information up here, where it's coming from. They just say, hey, I can associate it with any one of these things. So it gives you this really great combination of abilities to mix and match to learn things. Did that make sense? Did anyone follow that?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, it's very powerful. So
right,
yeah.
It's very powerful.
Yeah.
It's really very powerful, even if the details are fuzzy in different places. I had a couple of questions that immediately jumped up to me. One is, I still, I have ideas about this, but how is the attended area broadcast? How is that implemented? I don't want to go into it today, but all of this requires, everything I've been doing recently requires that we're constantly going through attentional areas in egocentric space. And columns have to know how to get to that area or observe in that area, whatever. Another question I had was, how does reverse causality work? Like, how do I go from saying, okay, I've learned that when I flip the switch, the light goes on. How do I then say, I want the light on, I need to flip the switch? This is a time-ordered causality here, so it wouldn't work. So, how do I do that? I don't know. Maybe this is something machine learning people understand.
Yeah, that's the thing I was trying to answer last Friday with the neurons integrating the goal with the current state and then learning.
Well, maybe I could be more. Maybe I'd be more receptive to that idea now, because I didn't really understand too well what you were talking about last week. But now, if I can phrase it this way, if I can say, okay, what if this picture I've shown you is correct, and these apical dendrites and these apical dendrites are doing what I'm saying they're doing, then you could maybe I'll understand your argument better, or what you're trying to get to, because I didn't understand this is what it was. This reverse causality. I'm sorry, I didn't have the right framework to think about it. By the way, there's another nice thing here too. If I can just keep going on. This has to do with multimodal learning, like how you can visually recognize an object when you've only learned it via touch. And I think this has nothing to do with behaviors, but it has to do with this basic mechanism I just talked about. So this has always puzzled me, like, how does I can reach my hand in a box and feel an object and almost visualize it as I'm doing it. And then later I can look at the object and recognize it. I've never seen it before. So as you learn an object with, let's say with one sense, let's say via touch, you attend to a series of egocentric locations, and the somatic system also broadcasts the features it's inferring. It's like saying, the somatic system is saying, oh, I'm observing this feature, and I'm observing this feature. These features could be simple. They could be complex features, like, oh, there's a handle, or it could be a simple feature like, oh, there's an edge. Those are both could work in this. At the bottom line, you could say the object I'm recognizing is an edge. So that's broadcast. And then the visual columns are not getting an input necessarily, right? But they also know where the attended area is in body-centric space. And so in some sense, the visual columns can say, oh, I'm in that space. Even though I'm not getting anything, I would if there was some light coming in. And so I think when you're doing this experiment, your eyes would actually be focused in the area where your fingers are, even though you can't see anything. And the visual columns would be saying, okay, I'm in that area. I know where I am in this egocentric space. I know what features being observed, because the somatic system is broadcasting it. So I can learn that, a somatic edge is a visual edge, and I've learned that in the past. Therefore, I can build up a model of the object even though I'm not seeing it. I know where we are in egocentric space. I know where I am in that egocentric space. I know what features are being observed there. That all information is available to me, even though I'm not getting any information. And I said here, this form of learning will work better if the visual system moves eyes to the attended area. So, you can attend to an area visually without moving your fovea to that point. You can fixate on a point and tend to the side, but it's not very good because your acuity off to the side is not very good. So of course, usually when we attend to something, we move our eyes to it. And so I would predict that if you were doing this experiment, you would be subconsciously moving your eyes to wherever your finger is, as if the eyes would be looking at them, because then those columns know where in the egocentric space they're looking. So this ties into this whole same theory. It just says, yep, this is what we're doing all the time. We're attending to areas in space. I'm learning. I can learn morphology objects this way. I'm learning multimodal this way. I'm learning behavioral models this way. I'm associating behaviors with behaviors, and all with the same basic mechanism. All right, I'm done. That's it.
Yeah, I like that idea I think it's a nice solution to the multimodal kind of learning and sharing of models without having to have any connectivity between those models while learning. Basically, it's just attention to different spaces, locations,
and broadcasting of whatever feature was observed by whoever could observe.
Yeah.
That required to get that to work, you had to previously touch objects while looking at it at the same time, because you had to associate the visual edge with the tactile edge, so that when there's a tactile edge, it predicts a visual edge, and there's a visual edge, it predicts the tactile edge, if the column is in that same location.
So how big is the extent of these layer 1 projections? I'm just wondering, can they? You mentioned that they can connect, across modalities as well, and I'm just wondering, is it is that something that we know that they extend like this far across modality and across?
Well, we talked about a lot of this in the heterarchy paper, and maybe Viviane would remember it better than I do. We do know that there's connections that go across different sides of the brain, from the left side to the right side. We know that they're very diffuse. Well, I wouldn't say that every layer 3 cell projects to every column in the cortex. That's not true. But they are pretty extensive. And also, this is a sort of a placeholder for the actual connections. There might be, there's a lot other stuff we don't know, like there's layer 5 to layer 5 cells and so on. So I do think what we can say is that generally anything that projects to layer 1 goes long distances. Right? It goes long distances. That's a general rule, and often there are many cells of which project to layer 1 in multiple parts of the cortex. So it'll send an axon up to this area, and then it'll keep going in the white matter and send an axon up to another area. So as a general rule, this is where signals are sent long distances. That's the general rule. But I'm not prescribing this is the only place or exactly, I think what I like about this idea is it theoretically hangs together. It's almost like I can't see it working any other way. So in some sense, these functions have to be implemented someplace, and this is my best guess to how it's implemented. But if it's not like this, it's going to be something else.
Can I maybe just kind of summarize in my own words how I understand the key idea to make sure we're on the same page?
Yeah.
So yeah, from what I understand, there are kind of two key ideas here. One, maybe the biggest one, is that for learning state-to-state transitions, we can get a widely broadcast signal of things that happened. It could be time passed, it could be a certain behavior has been recognized, it could be an object is recognized, it could be an action has been executed, and we can associate that thing that happened as context with a certain behavioral state or object state. And so when that thing happens, we'd predict that state. Is that
right?
Right.
And if it's a behavioral state, it could be tied to a behavioral sequence.
Yeah, it could kind of kick off a sequence that's time conditioned.
Right, like it'd be like there's two sort of examples. Imagine I push a button and the stapler automatically opens, or maybe I have a dial which rotates, and every position of the dial associates with the position of the stapler. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. So, but what you said is correct.
So basically inform, oh, you're in the first state of the stapler opening behavior now because button was pressed, and then that behavior is a temporal sequence purely, so that would kind of just go through time and make predictions.
Right. It could start a sequence of behaviors, or it could just make a single behavior change. Right.
Yeah, and then the second one being that we're just attending and inferring in a certain area of egocentric space, and even columns that don't get actual sensory input would still be attending to that area, and they might still get broadcast features from other columns or broadcast state IDs from other columns, and can therefore also learn even though they're not getting sensory input.
Right, but not all columns would be attending to that location, right? It's not like all columns would do this. It's like some columns will be attending to that space, but others wouldn't be. Even if
They wouldn't.
I'm just saying, take visual columns in V1 or V2. They can't. I don't think they can all attend to the same location in space, can they? My assumption is that they have this sort of spatial array, and physically they can't get input from all. I can't.
Yeah.
Right. So my assumption is that I physically can't get the all my visual columns to attend to the same space and get input from that area. Getting, they just can't get the light if they're not looking in the right direction. So I assume that was the same situation while attending. That
yeah, it could, I guess. I mean, maybe they just wouldn't do anything, but theoretically, if they're not getting input, maybe they could all attend to that area.
Right. You're right. They could.
And then, I mean, they wouldn't all be learning because they wouldn't be all connected to whatever is getting that input. So like not all visual columns would be connected to the column in your finger that's touching the mug.
I guess in my mind, the definition of attention is you specify an area in egocentric space, and the columns that are actually receiving or could be receiving information from that space, if they weren't blocked, they would be able to learn and vote. And now you're bringing up the idea that maybe all the columns could attend to that space and learn. I don't think
it
so.
might not be. I guess I was just wondering what would determine.
No, I would say pretty certainly not. I can come up with examples why I don't think it's going to work. So, but okay, that's a detail. But let's for the moment say that some columns would be receiving input in that space, so they could have. It's interesting. I'm imagining that.
Yeah, I guess the reason I was thinking about it that way is because it would kind of solve some of the issues around model sharing that we were talking about. That like if I learn something with my finger, I also know it with my other finger, or like I don't have to look at each object with my periphery as well to learn it. The peripheral columns can still kind of learn about them roughly. So
it's interesting. I'm doing a little thought experiment right now. I'm imagining I'm looking at a new object visually. It's some odd shape I've never seen before. And I'm asking myself, well, could I learn to recognize that object by touch? And I think probably I could. If it wasn't too complicated, but I could. Then I'm saying like, okay, when I'm learning, if I'm looking at it visually and I'm attending the different features, saying, oh, it's got a bump over here and a funny thing over here, it's like some weird shape. While I'm doing that, am I imagining like my right index finger touching it?
Yeah, I was just thinking, actually, if we have learned the model in our visual column, in the foveal vision column, we could, like with this mechanism, we could recognize it with any part of our body just by that part broadcasting the features to the visual column that has the model. Right? Like the model wouldn't even need to exist in any of our tactile columns.
Right.
We would just visualize it.
Right. So then it gets a little complicated because like obviously the sensors are not equivalent. So I can't learn to differentiate matte versus shiny finish or for gloss finishes with touch. Or I can't learn color with touch. I can't, so if I say, oh, there's a red circle here printed on the cup, the somatic system's going to say, I don't know what a red circle is. We've never co-located and observed red circles together because I don't get any input from red circles. So it's like I'm just pointing out a little bit of finesse on this. Not everything can be shared because not everything can be observed in different senses. So right. So if the differentiating feature of an object is its colors and its texture, its finish, then I won't be able to learn that via touch. Yeah, I think we're getting. Let me go back to my thought experiment. So I'm thinking, I'm looking at the object. I'm attending to different parts in the visually on the object, and so I'm like, oh, there's a bump here, and there's this here, and that here, and those features I'm observing are features that the somatosensory system knows. Like, oh, I know what an edge feels like. I know what a curve feels like. I may even know what a handle feels like. So as I'm observing these different parts, these are things that can be shared with the somatosensory system. The question is, could I be learning? Could I be the somatosensory system is not getting any input? Could I be learning what models of this object at all my fingers at once? You know, could I somehow imagine they're all attending to that space? Your argument is that the information is there. And I agree with that. It doesn't feel like I do that though, but maybe I do. Anyway, I don't think, anyway, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I kind of withdraw my suggestion that they could all be learning it. Actually, I think it would be much nicer just saying they don't all have to learn it, because when we're doing inference, they can just share the feature knowledge, and the column that knows it can infer it.
Right.
I think that's actually a really powerful idea. That would solve some of these kind of model sharing.
And then, this gets, you know, the example I often use, my walking in the dark between my bedroom and my bathroom. I learned that model visually, right? I don't think I ever, unlike a blind person, I never walked in the dark learning the model tactily. But when the dark occurs, my visual model predicts a visual feature at some point in my body space. And I can use any part of my body to go out and see if that feature is there. Basically, oh yeah, there should be a vertical edge at this corner of the room here. I know what it looks like. I've seen it, but I can't look at it now. So send someone over there to see if there's an edge there. Anybody could look at it. I think that's what you're talking about. It's like I can infer the visual model of my room with tactical, you know, just because I'm still using the visual model. I'm imagining seeing the edge there, and I said, well, then I should be able to touch the edge.
Yeah.
I should go to that space, and we all know that I should be feeling a vertical edge. So that's what I should be seeing. That's what should be there, and I can use any part of my sensory organs to figure that out. I could be a bat and using echolocation and saying, oh, I should imagine there's an edge there.
I can imagine your model of the room could be pretty good, visual only. But if you were to turn the lights off and force yourself to learn it tactily as well, your model probably just gets better and better. So having a better and better world model of this object could be tantamount to collecting, not just sharing visual information, but if you can collect a version that's tactile only and visual only, and you're sort of triangulating a really high resolution model of this object in the world.
Right. Well, that's sort of equivalent to saying, oh, I'm holding the coffee cup and I can feel its texture and its heat, and I can see its colors, and these are all combined. But remember, there's not one model, right? There are lots of models, and some models have colors, some models have heat, some, you know, texture. So it's more like you're not building one unified model, Scott. You're enhancing the different models you have. And so you can be better at mixing, matching modalities, or differentiating, you know, things.
Right. So I'm totally, yeah. It's like a distributed sort of different views of the same. Like the somatosensory system, the visual system, each one is
auditory.
like a auditory. You know, you're almost getting different views.
Right.
Which can be combined and collected,
right,
and sharpened. So I can. There's probably a certain amount of fuzziness that you can allow for if it's like the visual system trying to broadcast to the somatosensory sensory system. It probably can be somewhat inexact. We don't probably need perfect
all it
fidelity
is
on our location.
All it has to be is association in the voting neurons. That's it. There's no other knowledge. It's just, you know, like I could associate a sound with, you know, certain behaviors, or I can associate a sound with certain physical objects, you know, or a sound could invoke a behavior. I don't know. It's like, it's a very general purpose thing. You have all these models, and they can learn on their own, but they can also, I don't know, Viviane said it nicely, you could substitute a sensory system for the one that was learned. Anyway, this the whole thing is just changing the way I think about when we started out this whole endeavor many years ago, I always said there's two things we have to learn. We have to learn what a cortical column does. And once we figure out what a cortical column does, then we have to learn how they work together. So we spend most of our time learning what a cortical column does, and we have pretty good theory about that, pretty good understanding. And now we just what I feel like I'm doing now is we're learning more and more about, oh, how do they work together? It's a little more, it's not so simple. It's not just voting. It's like, oh, there's attentional areas, and then we're sharing this information, and there's this, and there's hierarchy. But I think we're adding lots of pieces to it now, right? So we've got the voting, we've got the causal associations I've just added today, and we've got the compositional structure. Maybe there's more, but we're really filling in a lot of the details about how columns work together, and this whole idea of attentional space as a sort of key foundation for both behavior and learning is a big idea in my mind. It's like, oh, I didn't think about that in the past.
Yeah, it's funny. I think, Scott, you just on Monday's technical research meeting, I think you brought it up, but we were talking a bit about how maybe we need to shift focus a bit more to the connectivity between columns instead of a single column being able to do everything. And maybe behaviors are just such a complex thing. Not many mammals with columns can actually perform tool use and things like that. So maybe it does require some kind of more sophisticated connectivity or additional, maybe it is not something that every single column is actually able to do on its own.
Right.
So,
that's why I started right today. I said, well, behavioral columns can't do this on their own, right?
Yeah. And yeah, I guess this kind of idea of learning causal associations through widely broadcast signals, maybe kind of think a bit more about okay, we have this general purpose algorithm. We just kind of figured out how that general purpose algorithm fits both morphology models and behavior models. And the column doesn't even know what it needs to be. It's still the same algorithm, or it doesn't even know what it's modeling. It's the same thing. Could we actually fit that onto some of our more sophisticated behaviors? Maybe the motor cortex actually learns about kind of using tools or certain things and learns that through causal associations with behavior models instead of individual behavior columns needing to learn that. And then maybe the kind of motor outputs that come from early sensory areas are really just about moving the sensor and not about affecting any, achieving any goals or manipulating the world.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I followed all that, but I think in this case, the layer 6 of the movement vectors. Remember, I was proposing just recently that all columns are basically morphology columns driven by sensors, and so the location in layer 6A is going to be identical everywhere. They're not. It's still going to be a location in space of an object. That's never going to change. I'm moving away from the idea that the locations could be something other than physical locations in space. I'm not sure if you were going in that direction or not. I didn't follow that completely. But again, every column. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I wasn't going in that direction. It would still be locations. It would just represent actions at locations, maybe, instead of morphological features or changes.
Right. Well, I think you were hitting at the beauty of this is that the column doesn't need to know what it's doing. It doesn't need to know what its sensory organism is. It doesn't need to know if it's learning behaviors or morphology. It doesn't, and the key things are that multiple columns have to be that are observing the same object have to vote. Ones that are observing different objects have to have the compositional projections, and then behaviors or changes in the world have to be causally associated in a time order dependent way with other changes in the world. But they don't know what those changes are. They don't know nothing, right? Nobody knows what any of this stuff means. It's just like, you can think of it that way. Looking at the same object, looking at compositional objects, two different objects, or two different behavioral objects, or even it could be even morphology objects looking at it in time order dependent, you know, so that would be your behavioral. What this doesn't, it's interesting, this doesn't answer anything at all like how you do sophisticated behavior, like solving problems. It just,
Yeah.
it gives a foundation for which to answer those questions.
Yeah, I feel like I tried to jump right to the producing the behaviors, but now I want to rethink what I came up with, given like first solving, like, okay, this solves, how do we learn, given an action or something happened, what state we will have next. And now, like, going back and rethinking, okay, now we have learned a model, like a causal model of the world. How do we now use it to cause change in the world? How do we use it to figure out which actions to take to get into a certain state that we want to go into? And how do we broadcast goals?
Right. I don't answer, those are interesting questions. But the beauty here is that the actions needed to solve a particular problem can be implemented. Anybody who is able to make that action occur. It doesn't have to be a particular part of the body or you know, the cortex. Anybody who's can make an action occur can be used to solve a problem. So we kind of separate out the embodiment in some sense. It's more about just like, okay, I need to have this behavior, and then I have to create this behavior in these locations, this behavior, and then this behavior, and then this behavior, and then we can ask ourselves, oh, how do I create that behavior? You know, who's going to make it happen? Oh, try the switch, or you know, talk to Alexa, something. I don't know.
I just thought of sort of a counterexample that I had thought of quite a while ago, which was is when someone draws a letter on your back, and you can kind of imagine what the letter was. I remember this challenged me a while ago because it's a different sensory patch with each. You know, it's like the opposite of a finger dragging along something, right? Because you've got each patch of skin on your back is receiving a different input. So you're not moving a sensor. So it's kind of like the opposite end of the spectrum. But I think this broadcasting idea seems to solve that, because all you really need to broadcast is a location in egocentric space along with a feature. And your visual system can reconstruct what, say, the letter B, if someone draws a letter B on your back, if all it's receiving is a feature and a location in egocentric space, and the visual system can reconstruct the letter that's being drawn on your skin. So without the need for a single sensor that's being dragged along.
I lost
does that
your
make
audio
sense?
there. I lost your audio there for a few seconds. Did anyone else lose it?
I think
We didn't
your
hear
audio was
you.
gone too. I think it might be the
Yeah.
headphones again.
I don't know. No, they seem to be working. They haven't beeped at me yet.
Okay. Well, I saw your mouth move. I didn't hear anything, but I heard everything Scott
Oh.
said.
Well, Scott, can I
Um,
just riff on that example? I thought it was an interesting one.
Yeah, sure.
So what's going on there? I mean, as someone's moving, I don't think the skin on my back can recognize a line. You know, it's when someone does that, I kind of visually imagine like it's almost like a pencil moving it along in a direction, right? I can't see the whole stroke yet. All I'm seeing is the actual movement of their finger on my back, and it's almost like visual, right? Someone's drawing my back. I kind of visualize what it looks like. And
if you missed what Scott said, I think
did.
it might be worth for Scott to repeat the potential solution, because I think it goes in. I think it does exactly that.
I'm sorry.
Maybe Scott, if you can.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we're probably saying the same thing, which is like,
Yeah.
if it's a sequence of features in the egocentric space being broadcast out of your somatosensory system, and you're just if the visual system is receiving them, it can basically reconstruct what it would be seeing from this collection of features and locations in egocentric space.
Right.
And
Right.
so I'm just saying, this broadcast and sharing solution seems like a really nice solution to this problem.
Right. The only that's good. All right. And the only twist I might put on that is that I think what's being broadcast is not a morphological feature. It's your behavioral state ID, like a line moving up, you know, type of thing. Because that's what's happening, right? You're either behave, but other than that, I think exactly right. It's right.
So in a way, it also, and the middle ground. So if there's a sensor moving, a single sensor patch moving around, that's sort of what we've, you know, primarily been working with. And then there's on this other end, many sensors receiving a little bit of information. So that's someone drawing on your back. So each part of your back is a different patch. Maybe something like flash inferences in the middle, where you've got a bunch of features or a bunch of sensory patches receiving a bunch of information at once.
You know, I bet you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I don't know. I'm just thinking that maybe there's.
You know,
Yeah.
your skin is actually lots of different types of sensors, right?
Mhm.
And there's half a dozen of them. And some are responsive to movement, and some are responsive to pressure.
Mhm.
And so the mix of these things changes at different points in your body. On your back, I'm just imagining that the most important thing on your back is to detect movement. Something like, you know, something's touching you, or something's changed back there. There's a bug walking on you, or you know, it's like, because we don't really use our backs to infer morphology very much, you know. So it's just like in the retina. The parvocellular cells are focused on the fovea, and then when you get to the outside, it's mostly magnocellular cells. Same thing would be occurring on the back. The equivalent of your back would be mostly magnocellular cells, and with low resolution, just like in the fovea. So your back is like the outside of the retina, you know, the outside of the retina, and your fingertips are like the fovea. I'm just riffing on the same idea here, but you may not even be able to. I was trying to imagine, like, well, what if someone actually, you know, could touch your back with the letter A all in one place, right? You could just touch it. After they touch you, I think it goes away. You're kind of like I'm leaning against this chair behind me, but I don't feel the chair because it's only really detecting changes. You know, I'm not constantly feeling like, oh, what's that pattern on my back? It's like, no, it's more like, oh, I move and it's changing. So I think your back may be restricted almost completely to behavioral features.
I
Your
was
back can't
curious.
do flash inference?
What's that?
Your back can't do flash inference?
I would bet no. I think it'd be
I would
pretty
doubt it
hard.
too. But I've always been curious about. So I don't know any blind people to talk to. Maybe someone on YouTube can weigh in the comments, or you guys. But like reading Braille, like how much can someone lay down their finger on a Braille letter or word without movement and be able to know
That's a
what that
great
word is, or
question.
do they have to drag it a little bit? You know,
I don't know. I do know
The
that.
answer is in Principles of Neuroscience.
is
Yeah.
it? Well, it's still
Yeah,
propping up my monitor, so
yeah.
maybe you can read it
What's
to
the
me.
answer? Do you have to move your
Well,
finger?
so if the Braille spacings are less than, I think 1 millimeter, so I think our finger has gratings, like,
Right.
so if it's less than that, then it can't distinguish two dots from one, first of all.
Huh.
So yeah, so there's a little bit of a scale issue there. So you can't print the Braille 2 spools. And the other is that the sensitivity, you know, of like your fingertip is highest, but if you go down like your finger, it's much less sensitive.
Right.
So that's another
Right.
thing.
Well, the fingertip of the area of highest acuity, right?
Yes,
It's like the
and
fovea.
also lips. So you can do
Yeah.
flash inference with your lips if you want to,
Well, I
which
don't
might
know.
be why babies put stuff in their mouth. I don't know.
Right. I'm not even sure it's flash inference. It's just it's higher acuity, so you can, you know. But I think, but the interesting question here is when people reading with Braille, are they moving their fingers over the? I think the answer is yes. They're moving their fingers over the dots. They don't push their finger down and then push their finger down and push their finger down. They move. They slide it over it, and I'm pretty certain of that. And the question is, I tried to do this once. I tried to, because I did a project with blind people. We worked on it for about 9 months, and we were trying to do sensory substitution device. And so what I learned is if I just put my finger on a Braille character, I couldn't recognize one from the next. This is impossible. I just couldn't do it. Now the question is, if I practice it over and over again, could I do it? Or is it that I really need to also practice moving my finger? That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that one, but I think they get much if you when you first start doing it, you're not very good at all, and and then with practice you get better at it.
Yeah, but yeah, if you're curious, like about the somatosensory system, chapter 18 is about receptors of the somatosensory system. Goes into like the part that Spike mentioned about if somebody were to write a letter A, that's kind of but none of our sensors are moving. It's kind of related to it's at exteroception. So there's the three functions of it says the three functions of somatosensory system is proprioception, exteroception, and interoception. Interoception is like measuring what's happening in your body organ. I didn't really focus on that part, but they can definitely be exteroception without proprioception when somebody else touches you. Like,
Right.
I mean, you probably know where your body is, but you're still getting sensation from the outside world, and I think that's still possible to go to your brain and build a model, which I think it could be why like our visual system could recognize, or not visual, but like why we could recognize like an A if somebody wrote that on their back. So yeah, and then about
go ahead.
yeah, about touch being only recognizing changes. I didn't read this in detail, but there's some mechanoreceptors. I guess it depends on like the how the mechanoreceptors in your skin works. If it's only like, for example, detecting vibrations or changes in pressure, then yeah, that naturally it's
No,
just
I know there are definitely ones that are not. There are definitely ones that are pressure sensitive. It's just the question is are they represented equally elsewhere in the body?
Yeah.
You can do another thought experiment would be like, okay, someone's not moving their finger on your back, but they're touching a series of dots, right? I would detect that, so there must be those pressure sensors, obviously they're back there. It's interesting. Then you would sort of visualize that row of dots and try to imagine what it looked like, right? It'd be sort of like you try to imagine in some sort of visual space, but that row of dots. It certainly could have. Imagine I watched you write a letter on a piece of paper, but your pen didn't have any ink. You can try to imagine someone drawing on a piece of paper, but there's no ink in the pen. And so this is like writing on your back. So you can't see the line, you just see where the tip is. And so you'd have to, it'd be difficult, right? You'd have to follow it very carefully. And sort of imagine the line that would have been drawn if it did get drawn. I'm just saying that's the equivalent of drawing on your back.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's not easy to do because you have to continually attend to it.
Right.
Yeah, it sounds like that's actually the main reason why we can't do, like, if you press the letter K on the entire back, you can't do it because maybe that kind of sharing mechanism only works sequentially attending to different locations. So like you can do dots in sequence, and in sequence attend to these different locations also with your visual cortex and visualize it, but you can't share all of these locations at once with the visual cortex.
All right. This theory, by the way, just go back to the theory we're talking about here. It says that you attend to an area and you infer what's in that area. But if you can't infer what's in that area, you have to go smaller attention areas. You have to narrow down until something is inferred. So in the case here, your back may only know like movement and pressure at points. It doesn't know, it hasn't learned anything else. So when you attend to the area, that's the highest thing it could send to you. it's sort of like if I was reading Braille, and if I don't know Braille, I have to touch almost each dot separately as I go around. Oh, there's a dot here, there's a dot here, there's a dot here, there's a dot. But only if you learn the letter, then you can do voting, and you can recognize it all at once. And then you say, oh, there's a letter A here. So this all fits with this. The idea is that you have to narrow down to there's a common recognize the thing you're attending to, the area you're attending to. There's somebody recognizing something there. And in terms of your back, the best you can do is a dot or movement. There's nothing else that the back knows how to recognize.
It's interesting. I'm thinking more now about learning, not inference. And I'm wondering if someone draws like some weird shape, where would this model be stored? It's not being drawn on a specific column. Is it another column that's observing all of them at the same time?
So here's what I think is going on in a big picture. Imagine you're at the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is attending to some area and saying, what's there? And then attends to some other area and what's there. What comes back could be a very low level feature or it could be a high level feature, depends on if someone's able to recognize it. So at that point, you're broadcasting to everybody. Everybody who could be attending to that area in physical space is getting, here's a feature at this, here's a feature that you know at this physical location. Here's a feature that you know at this location in space. So the learning would occur at the hippocampus, and it would occur to anybody below there who could be observing that location in space and would know what that feature is. So it could be learning a lot of places all at once.
But yeah, I think it's a really nice, new, powerful idea that solves a lot of our previous problems, both for learning and inference. So
I think one thing I'm a little confused by, or not thinking through properly, is how every column is having access to egocentric location, and not getting, it feels untransformed by like an object reference frame, right?
So if you look at my questions on the Excalibur on the right here, I have two questions. And the first is, how is attended area broadcast? And I think that's the question you're asking in some sense.
Yeah.
So mechanistically, I don't know, but theoretically, it's pretty straightforward. There has to be a common egocentric reference frame or a representation of space. We saw that, by the way, in the superior colliculus. It on its surface mapped a region of space around the body. And then a column has to be able to take a location that it has in an allocentric space and say what it is in the egocentric space. And then similarly, you have to say, given an egocentric location, is this column in that region? You know what I'm saying? Is it in there? So you just, the egocentric space becomes the common language between all columns. And how that exactly works, I don't know. You know, we've talked about things like what were those weird parts of the cortex that are in between? Oh gosh, I'm losing my brain.
Between where?
With like
describe the function.
You know, we don't know the function. It's like lots of parts of the cortex broadcast to it. They're physical structures that are so that are like below. They're in the white matter, almost like they're not cortex, but there are a lot of cortex projection by everything. Yeah, the classroom. I think that was one of them. Anyway, there's somebody has to implement this physical space. It seems like I don't know. I don't know how that's done, but it has to happen. It just
but it seems like that location in egocentric space still needs to be transformed into object-centric space in the receiving column, right? Like if the visual column is trying to infer something from based how the touch sensor is moving, you still want to from
Well-
it into the object it's recognizing its reference frame.
I think we've talked about this before. I think the way that the brain might do this is not transfer locations, but it just has to transfer movement vectors, and therefore it's a much simpler transformation. And so the columns have to infer where they are based on movement. No one tells them where they are, and so the transformation is like, oh, we can't really share locations, but we can. It's much easier to share directions of movements and translate those. And so and everybody has to infer the correct location based on that. Monty today doesn't do that, right? Monty does location transforms, right?
I mean, would we even need to take a location or movement representation in the column that's getting sensory input? Couldn't we just look at whatever place we represent the attention in, like which might actually be in the thalamus, and see which area of space is being attended to and broadcast that location to the column?
I didn't follow that. Sounded good, but I didn't follow it.
So I feel like we don't need to send a location from the touch column to the vision column. We just need to send a location from the attention map to the vision column.
Right. No column talks directly to another column. They all go
Right.
through they all go through egocentric. But how is that done in neuroscience? I don't know. Right. I don't have like, oh, here's the part of the brain that's doing that.
Yeah, but so yeah, there wouldn't need to be a lot of like column to egocentric to object centric transformations that need to happen, because it would be coming from outside the neocortex into the column that's not receiving sensory input directly.
But it would still have to go through the egocentric space, right?
Yeah, so it would already be in the egocentric space, right? Like the attention map would be in egocentric space.
Right. So the
And
attention
then-
map is an egocentric space. Just we can riff on that a little bit. Imagine I was out there looking at the intersection, and then something starts to move. Everything is static, and something starts to move. So I immediately tend to the thing that's moving. What does that mean? I would attend. There's a bunch of columns now that are detecting change. They're like, there's changing features, and the area prescribed by those changing features is the area I want to attend to. It's sort of bounded by the changing morphology features. That's one way of like. So it's not necessarily like what does it mean to attend to an area? Well, I have a bunch of columns. They know where they are. Those columns maybe know where they are in space in a reference frame that maybe it's a hippocampus. I don't know, but that becomes the area that's broadcast. It's like saying, okay, these are the boundaries of where and how that gets. I don't know how that works, but it's not like it's not some blob of sphere in space. It's defined by the edges of the thing that's moving. That's the part you want to attend to, and if things are inside of that, you want to know what's going on. Well, actually, those are the features you have to determine. I'm thinking out loud right now. It's kind of interesting. Also, imagine the world isn't changing. This is something that you guys have been working on, Ramy, I think, in particular. Imagine the world is not changing, but there's a bunch of objects out there. What do we attend to? It's easiest if we can find a contiguous border around something, right? Then we can say, oh, I don't know what this object is, but there's a contiguous border on it. That's the area we need to attend to. If there's a bunch of overlapping things that are not recognized, then it becomes really hard to know what to attend to. And then you'd have to zoom down smaller and smaller until you recognize something. I'm just mentally thinking through the mechanism here. I think it works pretty well, actually. Anyway, it's an interesting question what Monty should do. Monty, again, could take is already taking a shortcut in some sense by just working in locations and using, Cartesian coordinates, which might be just fine.
Yeah, Yeah, I feel like those were kind of two big ideas today. I kind of just want to go away and think more about like what impact they have on like the other open questions that we have. I feel like we might be able to untangle some other things with those
What would be
ideas.
what would be the next big question you want to think about in terms of this?
I guess in terms of actions, the next big question would be how do we use these causal associations or these models of causality to figure out actions to kind of output to go from one state to another? Like,
Okay.
say I know if this action input comes in, my stapler changes from state A to state B. I know that now, but now I have the goal to close the stapler.
All right. So this is my second question I had on the right there. How does reverse causality work?
Yeah.
Like, I want the light on. How do I know I have to flip the switch? Does machine learning tell us anything about this? I mean, is this like part of reinforcement learning, or has this topic been? It seems like something that people would have thought about.
Yeah, definitely. I guess. Yeah, I have to
All right.
think a
I
bit
don't know.
more.
Right. That was.
I think with the light on switch flip,
Yeah.
it's almost like the switch in the up position is associated with the light on, and the switch in the off position is associated with light off, right? They're just pairwise associations. It doesn't even really seem like time is an important factor here.
Well, what if the
If
switch
you
is just a button, and it's a momentary button? I push the button. There's no state of the switch.
true.
So the button turns the light on. I've learned that. Now I say, oh, I want to turn the light on. Those things I've labeled causal association, time order dependent, the projections of layer 1, they just go one way.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
So I think
Right.
what people do in machine learning often is you learn two functions, a forward model and a backward model. One is to, given two states, you output which action transitions you from between those two states. And the other function is the forward model, which is given a state and an action, you predict the next state. And the forward model is basically what you just proposed here. We have a current state and an action or whatever other input, and we predict the next state. And what we would need is the inverse model, which is we have a current state and a goal state, and we predict the action in between. But as far as I know, I'm not sure they are ever like one function. They're like usually two functions that are being learned. I mean, from the same data, but there's still two functions. So it might still require a second mechanism, like layer 5 neurons learning, given current state and goal state, output this action. That's kind of a bit like what I proposed on Friday.
Sorry, maybe I
But
should listen
yeah.
to that again. Just briefly, because I'm going to work on this problem. So briefly, on Friday, you were saying the apical dendrites could represent the desired state.
Yeah. And then like closer to the cell body, there we would have the current state. And then if we have a certain current state and then a desired state comes in at the apical dendrites, that would cause a layer 5 neuron to burst fire and output an action.
All right. Well, I think that's a good problem to think about.
Do we still have this issue though, where we're asking the cortex to possibly learn associations a little too quickly? Because there was that issue of, let's say we have a dial controlling the stapler or a button controlling a stapler. You can learn that association like instantly.
Right. I remember all learning starts in the hippocampus. This is my new mantra. So the hippocampus will learn these things rapidly, instantly. But it takes practice for as you repeat these things for these more sophisticated morphological models to be learned lower down. So we imagine all this stuff is happening in the hippocampus first, and all the rest of the learning is basically just supporting that in some sense. So I don't think that's a problem right now. I mean, the details need to be thought about more, but.
Well, I think it might have implications for what the action being sent out is of a column. Because like, as we talked about, the potential range of actions that could close the stapler could be enormous. Do we want to learn them all pairwise in a column, or
No, it just
I'm just thinking, there's just some mediator step, like
no,
the
you don't need
hippocampus
that.
or whatever, or
you don't need it. It just basically it's anything that an action that's followed by another action can be learned. So as long as you're broadcasting it, the only thing that you could learn any. If I have 150,000 columns and they're all broadcasting their layers 2 and layer 3, then any correlation between them can be learned. So you don't need an arbitrary. It's
I was thinking of the hippocampus as the mediator because of its because of its ability to create very rapid associations, which could eventually be migrated to the hippocampus or to cortex. I don't know how.
Right.
But
I think I know how. So it's not immediate. Just think all learning starts in hippocampus. It's everything. Morphology models, everything starts. It all requires attending to some space and then learning these connections. And then through practice, we can talk about how it gets relearned down in the cortex. But we touched on that already some here. Like you can learn in one modality and learn it on another modality. So I don't think the speed of learning is a problem here. I just think we need a mechanism that says, oh, how does this reverse causality work? How could we learn?
One thing I was thinking today, and I have to think through this a bit more, is whether another kind of type of model could be learned in, for example, the motor cortex, which is representing actions at locations. And there we could learn kind of general models of more complex actions like pincer grasp. And you would learn like a pincer grasp with your fingers, but then you might learn that same thing with chopsticks. You can kind of affect the same change with chopsticks, or you can affect the same change with tongs in the kitchen, this kind of thing tool. Like there are several ways you can kind of pinch something and to pick it up, and those could all be associated with the same type of action output of a column that wants to transition from state A to state B. That
but why does it have to be different in the motor cortex? I mean, I can imagine things only being learned in the motor cortex, but does it require a different mechanism there?
No, the columns would work exactly the same. I was just thinking maybe that model is kind of some more like higher order action sequences or something like that.
Yeah, I think this attentional window thing solves all these problems. It's eventually, in some sense, I whether I'm on an action or I'm observing something in an attentional window, if someone can handle the thing I want, they're going to give me back the most sophisticated answer they can. So, but if I can't, then I have to tend to smaller pieces. So maybe if I want to grasp something, my fingers, the models of my fingers can do that very rapidly, no problem at all. But if I can't use my fingers, I have to attend to it very carefully. I have to say, oh, okay, pick up a chopstick in my left hand, pick up a chopstick in my right hand, then move them together. It's a much more, I'm taking advantage of whatever behaviors I do have available to me. Or I could learn to pick something up by attending to some visual spaces, like a person who's paralyzed could. I think the sophistication of the body behaviors from the cortex point of view is that you could learn complex things in one part of the cortex, but then you have to break them down into pieces that are already known in other parts of the cortex. I don't know how to describe that better, but I think, yeah, I don't know how to. But maybe the other part is there's parts of this that are done subcortically, like we saw with the pericolliculus, and so how much of stuff is subcortical? Like walking, I think, is almost all subcortical. The cortex doesn't really know how to do that. you know, you don't even know how you balance. There's no cortex involved in balancing,
Yeah.
standing upright.
Yeah, maybe
Well,
it's not a kind of different type of model or anything. I was thinking like lots of behaviors might require you to like pinch something or to, like anything you
right,
want to pick up, or if you want to squeeze an object or squeeze a button, a lot of that requires this. So there must be some kind of more general model of that specific kind of pinching behavior that you can then learn in the behavior model to associate with a
right,
bunch of different state transitions that all require this basic behavior.
right. Where the
That-
auditory output can't pinch, right? But
yeah.
right.
Or yeah, maybe the pinching grasp is also subcortically learned, and it's just associated with an action output from the
Well,
column.
that's why I brought it up. But
Yeah.
I think in general, right, I think different parts of the cortex will have different abilities, both for inference and for motor outputs. It depends what's learned. And if you require a part of the cortex to do something that it hasn't learned as well, then you take finer attentional detail and more time. Just like you can recognize a letter in your back. Well, that's maybe I won't use that one, but you know, yeah, right. If you're trying to turn the light switch on with your elbow, well, that is going to take more attention because you haven't learned those behaviors. But if I'm holding a switch in my hand and I want to turn it, that my hand knows how to do that type of thing. Hand columns know how to do that. Anyway, I think this system accommodates a whole variety of abilities across modalities, and in some modalities things will be better, in some modalities it'll take more attention and time to achieve the same result. Well, I think thinking about reverse causality is an interesting one.
Yeah, another thing I want to think a bit more about is how these ideas that we discussed a lot in the past weeks around the hippocampus especially, plus also attention, could apply to Monty, and how we could incorporate those there.
Yeah, I think Monty will have to have the equivalent to the attentional space. I can't imagine how it has to do that.
Right. And yeah, right now Monty is basically the hippocampus, so it learns everything fast. But
right. I think that's fine too. Again, you
Yeah.
know, in my mind, the only reason that the rest of the brain doesn't learn fast is it takes too much neural machinery to learn fast, too much energy and too much, you know.
Yeah, and I guess it can have advantages for things lower in the hierarchy to learn slower, because if
Right.
the lower levels change their representation, everything above has to relearn how to interpret its input. So yeah, once we have kind of more deeper hierarchy in Monty, it might
Right.
be kind of necessary to slow down learning at the lower levels.
You know, if you think about some future implementation of our work in some sort of embodied system or robot or something like that, you could just swap in and out different models willy-nilly, and all of a sudden, you know, the same embodiment can become an expert piano player or expert carpenter, or, you know, I don't know, whatever, right? These are just models that could swap them in and out. I don't know, that just made me think of that. With Monty, we can do everything. We can just learn fast. We can just swap out the whole thing, put a new upgrade to the system.